as I think everyone in this room knows, community board reform and empowerment is a subject very dear to the Borough President. And paramount to that is making sure board members have the resources they need so that they can do their jobs effectively. And our office, every year with the help of city agencies, put together trainings on budget, land use, and conflicts of interest. Alex attends and presents at least 3 times, 4 times, to 5 times.
Countless times.
Yes. And he's fabulous. And thank you to Brad for setting this up so everyone here at Board 2 can get a little refresher in case you missed it. And without further ado, Alex Kipp.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. My name is Alex. I'm from the New York City Conflicts of Interest Board, which is a little tiny city agency that occupies itself with the Chapter 68 of the City Charter, which is the Conflicts of Interest section. And that covers just about everybody who's got any kind of position with New York City government, whether it's a school teacher, firefighter, DOI investigator, or a community board member. We're all covered by these basic conflicts of interest provisions set forth in Chapter 68. I am the director of a little tiny training unit of 2 people, me and that guy there, the guy I direct right there. Say hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Jeffers.
Thanks. Yeah, highly well-staffed. It's my job to run around, our job to run around the city and talk about the law, which is what we'll do today. Just a tiny bit of history to kind of put in perspective who we are and what we're trying to do. The Conflicts of Interest Board has not been around that long, only about 17 years. It was preceded by the Board of Ethics, which had been around for about 30 years, from 59 to 89, which was pretty old for a municipal ethics board. It served in largely an advisory capacity, meaning that basically it issued these opinions that public servants wrote in, you know, they'd ask different questions, and it would issue in response these written pieces of advice. It issued like 680 pieces of advice over the course of 30 years. But it was known what we call now as somewhat of a toothless tiger, because the problem was that if a particular public servant wrote in and asked for advice on a particular issue, they could get this piece of advice back, and then as long as what they were going to do wasn't criminal in nature, there really weren't any repercussions about not following the advice of the board, or there wasn't much anyway. And in the 80s, that and how public integrity was managed, and what they came up with eventually was a ballot initiative that New York City voted on in '89. It was approved, and they established, I think, in 1990, the Conflicts of Interest Board. That board was restructured in some ways in terms of what we are. There are 5 independent members who serve on the board. What do I mean independent? I mean that we are not a mayoral agency. The members are appointed by the mayor at the advice and consent of the city council. So there was some attempt at eliminating partisanship from conflicts of interest management. And we got a couple of mandates. One of those mandates is training, what we're doing this evening. Another one was enforcement. We have an enforcement unit. Those are the attorneys that are dedicated day in, day out to taking complaints in the form of allegations of violations of the law. They use the Department of Investigation to investigate those complaints. And a conflict of interest violation could carry a civil penalty of up to $10,000. Now, that's pretty steep for you know, a conflicts of interest violation. But I think in the rare instances where that kind of fine has been levied, I think we probably all agree that the person in question probably deserved what they got. That most recent time that kind of fine has been used was against a gentleman named, or one of the most recent was a gentleman named Anthony Serra. Does anybody remember this guy? His name has resurfaced in a couple of articles lately. He was a former deputy warden of the Department of Corrections. Does that ring any bells? Oh yes. Do you remember what he did?
That wasn't to do with the painting, was it?
No, although that definitely was a problem. That probably is a criminal problem, actually, when people go and try to steal a Dali painting, and a stupidity problem when they, you know, as I understand it, kind of the shorthand version of this it goes something like this. There's 2 corrections officers. They're looking at a painting one day, and somebody goes, you know, hey, you know who made that painting? He's like, I don't know. I bet that painting's worth a lot of money, though, because it was made by some guy named Dali. He goes, yeah, I bet you're right. Maybe we should take that painting. And he says, yeah, but aren't they going to know? And I said, no, I'll make a copy. It's fine, I'll make a copy. And the guy said, well, wait, how are you going to make a copy? Can you paint? He goes, hey, don't worry, it's like surrealist. Nobody's going to know the difference anyway. So he goes home, he puts up a projector, he gets some poster board out, and he makes a copy. And then they cut the painting out and they replace it with this poster board. That's how I heard it happened, or some. So that was a little bit stupid, and definitely was a problem, but not a conflict of interest problem. Mr. Serra, on the other hand, was a very high-level uniformed services guy. He had a consulting job paid for a certain campaign of an individual who, we don't have to name here, but that individual was running for re-election for governor of New York State, right? Recently, a few years ago. In any case, I'm going to get throttled by somebody. But in any case, he had this job. He thought, I'll bet they'll pay me more money if I show them what a great grassroots organizer I am. Or I don't know if that quite was his logic. But in any case, someone had related to me that was somehow involved in it. But he then decided to ask corrections officers whom he supervised to volunteer their time to go work for this campaign, essentially, both on the clock and off the clock, which are two different related violations. And then he also then woke up when, things went on fine for him. He just thought he was getting away with it. One day he wakes up at his house in Putnam County. He notices that the floorboards need replacing. There needs some paint on the wall over there. The deck needs work over there. And he starts asking corrections officers to remodel his house for free on the weekends. For which, so then they do this big investigation. They find out there's some just outright theft going on too. The DA takes up the case. He ends up spending a year in jail. He pays $50,000 on the larceny charge and then another $20,000 on conflicts of interest charges. I think we can all agree that's like a bad apple case. It's a corruption case. That's probably the sexiest that ever gets the conflicts of interest board, And we are such a little tiny part of this thing once the DA takes it over because it's really a corruption case. And that's not why we're around. A public integrity law is not an anti-corruption law. Those are important issues. They're just not our issues. The law that we deal with and the law that we're going to talk about tonight is actually written from the stance that most people who are in public service are trying to do the right thing. The problem is that in protecting the integrity of one's job, the right thing is not always so obvious. And that is why the most important thing we do is to give free, confidential legal advice to help well-meaning public servants stay in compliance with the law. And I'll just say a word about that, about how that works. There's a leaflet here. Please take a copy when we're done. It's got our phone number on it. That's the most important thing on there. If you ever have any kind of question that you think is conflicts of interest related about some kind of potential interest that may come up for vote at the community board or whatever kinds of fundraising or political issues, whatever you think, even if you think you have a doubt, like you're not sure if it's related or not, you call us up 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, you get an operator, and then you're asked to speak to the lawyer of the day. Sort of a silly name, I know, but it makes it sound like you get a different, answer depending on what lawyer you talk to. That's not what I mean. You always get the same answer, but the important thing is you can talk to somebody right away. Everything that you want advice on is confidential. What does that mean? That means nobody at the community board is going to be notified about your call. Nobody at the press, nobody anywhere is going to be notified or can't be notified unless you want them to be that you made an advice call to the Conflicts of Interest Board. Now, I just said everything is confidential. That's absolutely true. Except in one case. There is one kind of thing. Sean, you have a conflict of interest? You take it over? Yeah. No, thanks for being here. All right. So there is one kind of case, one particular class of facts, where if I did say them to the legal advice attorney, they might say, well, actually, that thing you just said to me, I do actually have to report that thing. Can anybody here tell me what kind of thing I might say to them, or like, I can't keep that confidential, I have to report that?
Someone accepting money?
Criminal act. A criminal act, someone accepting money, like a bribery case, especially, and this is the emphasis, if the criminal act has already happened. So somebody calls us up and says, hey, a contractor offered me $75 bribe. I didn't take it, but I shot it. Well, good, great. You're complying with this civil law, right? That's great. But then we got this murder thing, which is a bigger problem. I don't think anybody's ever done that. But I'll tell you what they do sometimes is someone calls us up and says, I've been doing this thing already for 6 months. Is that a conflict of interest? Was it a conflict of interest? And we're not a church. We can't give absolution. It's a law enforcement aid. It'd be nice if you call us up and say like, hey, I feel really bad. We say like, okay, just sit in the corner and think about what you've done. Right, absolution, whatever. We can't do that. That if you admit that you violated the law, then that will probably open up an enforcement case. So call early and often, I think, is the emphasis there. Once we get all of the information we need from you to make a determination on your question, you're going to get one of 3 answers, pretty much. You're either going to get, no, that's not a violation of Chapter 68 of the City Charter, and if you would like that in writing, we will give that to you, and then you are free to share that with whomever you want, reporters, fellow community board members, whomever. 2, in some other case, we might tell you, yes, that is a violation of conflicts of interest law, so you can't partake in that action, or you can't take that action, at least not in the way you were talking about, because you run the risk of enforcement. Or 3, we might tell you, in some very limited cases, we think that your specific set of facts are probably eligible for a waiver under the law, which means that the action that you propose violates the letter of the law, but really not the spirit of the law. And in those cases, the board has the right to grant a waiver where it basically says, okay, you've disclosed the problem to us, we've set forth a couple of conditions, but we're going to go ahead and let you take that action subject to those conditions because we feel that there's no real inherent conflict of interest if you satisfy those conditions. Waivers are probably not granted so much to community boards as they are to like regular rank-and-file public servants, but there are cases where it can come up, and we might talk about 1 or 2 of those this evening. Now, conflicts of interest. Some of this stuff is easy to talk about. Cases where I'll tell you what what the conflicts of interest board, when we talk to community boards, I'll tell you what they're not worried about. This would be a violation, but nobody's particularly worried about a community board member talking to some member of the community who's gotten some matter up for vote and saying like, hey, I don't know, this vote could be yes or could be no, it depends, this hand's feeling a little light. That is a corruption case. That's soliciting for a bribe, and that would be a violation. But that's not what people ask about. Because I'll tell you what, people who do shakedowns, they know what they're doing, and they don't care what the law is. They just think they can get away with it. The other part of the law is to protect the integrity of our actions, and that means I have to refrain from taking any action that could potentially benefit any interest of mine or any interest of one who is associated with me. Now that's a lot of legalese. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. I can't take any action that could potentially affect any present or potential interest that I have, or any potential or present interest of an associate, one who is associated with me. An associate would be like an employer, a debtor, a creditor, a landlord, a tenant, a husband, a wife, a child, a parent, a sibling. I think that's pretty much the list, actually. So someone with whom I have a financial relationship or a close relative, as I've just enumerated. Now, let me give you an example. Obvious misuse, or obvious violation, and then not so obvious violation. Hiring. You hear about this sometimes in terms of conflicts of interest in the city, accusations of nepotism. I don't know how often it's true, but you do hear these things sometimes. Let's do a little hypothetical here. Let's say the Conflicts of Interest Board, where Jonathan and I work, let's say we were not broke. That's quite hypothetical, right? But let's say we were just, flush with cash, right? Because everybody thought public integrity was such a big issue that it gave us enough of a budget. We're going to hire another lawyer. Mostly lawyers that work there. Are there any attorneys here tonight? Right. Okay, so, having a lot of lawyers there is not such a bad thing. Right? It's tolerable. Now, let's say they're going to hire another lawyer. Now, my brother is an attorney. He hates his job. That's actually true. And I say to him, I know he lives in Houston too. He hates the city he lives in and he hates his job. Not a great combination. I say, hey, I know you don't like working for this big firm. Perhaps maybe you'd like to work for the city. It's going to be for a significant drop in your pay, but perhaps a little bit better hours and a little more rewarding. I don't know. Send me your resume, your cover letter. I'll see if I can swing you a job. Now, the obvious thing is, of course, I can't be putting my brother's resume at the top of the pile. I can't interview my own brother. I can't put leverage on subordinates to give my brother a break or falsify interview records or the rest of it. That would be misusing my position to get a financial benefit for my brother, the financial benefit being the city job. Okay. However, the Chapter 68 doesn't stop there. It wants to protect the integrity of the entire hiring process, which will be tainted if I take any action on that process because I have a relative who's being considered. Ergo, if my brother applies for a job at my agency, which certainly is possible, that's possible, he can work there. I probably can't supervise him, he probably can't supervise me if he works there. He's never going to supervise me, actually, because I'm older. But in any case, if he does apply for the job, it means that I recuse myself from the entire hiring process. I don't look at any applications. I don't interview any candidates. I don't set any appointments. It's that far. Like, I get myself out of that entire process. Because if I take any action in that process, what is the New York Post going to say? And that's not a bad question to ask oneself when you want to put it like a layman's reasoning on these conflicts of interest issues about when you should call us. Now, having said all that, the way the law covers part-time public servants, as you all are, is a little bit different than for full-time public servants who are paid. A lot of the things that we'll talk about this evening, and very briefly, are voting issues, because that's, I think, probably the most important thing. So let's talk about voting for a second. There are 3 or 4 main categories where voting issues come up in terms of conflict of interest. The behavior that is required is always the same. It's the 3 Ds. You disclose your interest, your conflict, you discuss the interest, or you discuss the issue that's on the table, whatever you want to say about it. You can be opposed to the rest of the community board, for the rest of the community board. You can advocate for a position that could really make you a lot of money. It doesn't matter. Like, you've already disclosed what your interest is, so you can say whatever you want. And then you don't vote. 3 Ds. Disclose, discuss, don't vote. Where do we apply that behavior? 4 major categories. First off, if any matter comes for vote, either before the board or before the committee where I'm sitting, and that vote could affect any present or potential interest of mine, I don't vote on it. That means if my own business is going to profit by it, if my employer's business is going to profit by it, if my spouse's business is going to profit by it, I disclose what that interest is, then I'm free to discuss how great I think it still is for the community, and then I don't vote. Crucial, of course, to this is that not only that you don't vote, but that you do disclose, because, as a service to your other community board members and to try to make this a really equitable discussion, saying, I think this is, I'm not going to vote, but I think this is great for the community sounds different than, I'm not going to vote on this, I think this sounds great for the community, and by the way, that vote yes could mean like $3 million in my company's, accounts, whatever, like it could mean $3 million for my company. We want to know those things, right? So disclose, discuss, don't vote. First issue, it's when your financial interests or your associate's financial interests could be potentially affected. Second issue, if you sit on the board of directors of a not-for-profit, even not for pay, you're just sitting on the board of directors of a not-for-profit, it's volunteer, but because you're on the board of directors, you have somewhat of a managing interest in that not-for-profit. If that not-for-profit's interests are going to be affected by a vote on the board or by the committee, again, you disclose, you discuss, and you don't vote. Now, sometimes people ask this, what do you mean about their interests? Do you mean like if a not-for-profit generally advocates for a certain type of housing policy and they advocate for that, do I have to disclose, discuss, don't vote then? And I think the answer to that is no. It's when the not-for-profit is actually going to be, like it financially is going to be affected by the vote, I think is when you have the issue where you disclose, discuss, don't vote. That's in your community handbook. but I think I'm saying that correctly. Boy, I wish I had it at the tip of my head right now, but I'm pretty sure that's the way that that answer is for not-for-profits. The third issue. Anybody here work for the city besides me?
I did.
You did? Okay.
Teacher.
Teacher. Okay. So, great example. What's your name?
Carol Yankee.
Carol?
Yes.
Okay. So, Carol, if an issue comes up that's Department of Ed, then again, Carol discloses that she works for the Department of Ed, not formally work. You wouldn't have to do that now. But if you still work for the Department of Ed, you say, hey, I work for the Department of Ed, then you discuss the issue like everybody else, and then you don't vote. And it's the same thing on the committee. Like if, if the issue comes up in the committee, you discuss, don't vote. The last issue is a post-employment issue. And this sounds a little strange, but it's one that one does have to comply with. And this is not so obvious. I don't think we've ever seen a case like this, but this is sort of straight legal talk. If I have an interest in working for a company, and there's a matter coming up that's going to affect the interest of that company, like I've got an application for employment in, they're considering me, I'm interviewing for them, then again, I disclose, I discuss, and I don't vote. Because it's present or potential interest, and they might hire me in 2 weeks, and certainly someone might be able to cast aspersions on me if like I do this vote, it's great for the company, and 2 weeks later I'm hired. I want to disclose, discuss, and not vote on those things. Committees. You can be on any committee you like. Don't have to worry about conflicts of interest. Again, if the issue comes up and it's one of those 4 categories, you disclose, you discuss, you don't vote. The only issue there is chairing the committee. You cannot chair, like I cannot chair a committee if the committee that I'm on is likely to hear matters where I have to disclose, discuss, and don't vote all the time. So, for example, and I think the hypothetical actually laid out in the blue one is the one I'll use right now, liquor license applications. I think there's a committee that looks at those, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a bar owner. As a bar owner, I can sit on the committee that considers the liquor license applications. That's not a problem. I just disclose, discuss, and I don't vote on my own liquor license application. What I cannot do is I cannot chair that committee, because in some ways, even if one discusses, and refrains from voting, a chair is still kind of running the parliamentary process, and therefore there might be a question that comes in, was someone navigating the discussion to somehow influence competition, etc., etc. Here's an interesting thing, though, about that whole liquor license situation. While I am not able to vote on my own liquor license application, and I can't chair the committee, when other bars come to the same committee and they want their liquor license applications reviewed and approved, I don't have to disclose, discuss, or refrain from voting. Because it's possible, one might conceive that it's bad to have competition, and bars going to open right next to me. But it's also possible to conceive that in the end, it could be really good that another bar opens up right next door to me. Now we've got a bar district and more customers start going there. That at best is a potential projected hypothetical financial gain. Nobody's sure what it could be. It's indirect at best. Therefore, you only refrain, when it's your interest, not some competitor's interest. But you still can't chair that committee if you're one of those, a bar owner. Okay. Chairing a meeting. Being the chair. I'm allowed to be the chair. I'm allowed to have conflicting interests. The only thing is I can't run the meeting. I can't preside over that meeting where the issue that I have to recuse on is going to be voted on. Somebody else has got to run the discussion on that meeting. And does anybody here know, is it the whole meeting or is it just the part of the meeting where the chair has to recuse? I can look.
It's just a part of it.
I think you're right.
This has been discussed with the
Yeah,
board
just
before.
that
I believe
part.
it's just that part.
Yes.
I think it's just the part of the meeting.
Got nothing left for that part.
Yeah.
That's what the board has done in the past, though.
Okay, I think that's, I think a board chair may have an interest or firm organization which regularly has matters before that board, provided he or she refrains from making any decisions or taking any other official board actions on matters involving that interest and does not preside at board meetings when such matters may be considered or voted upon. Well, the language here is a little bit ambiguous, but I think, you know, so you might call for legal advice on that, but my understanding is that, my layperson's understanding is that means you can't preside over that part of the meeting. You know, if you wanted a little more clarity, you might, I mean, that's language right out of the AO, but I find that a little bit discomfortingly ambiguous.
Well, I know in Board 2, the issue has come up, and that is the policy that we have followed. We did not share that part of it.
That part of the meeting. Okay, well then, you know, everybody's then, that seems to be a solution that everybody's come to, and,
That's the reason we're still looking for.
yeah, all right. Yeah, I haven't seen that come up as an enforcement matter where somebody said, oh, you didn't recuse enough from that. So I'm going to assume that that's the accepted practice. Okay, voting, tabulating votes. How does that work in relation to conflict of interest? What do we need to do? We need a quorum, right? And there's what, 51 members? 50 members. Okay, so a quorum is what? Is
26.
Yeah, half plus one. Okay. So, and then a normal vote passes if you have a majority of yes votes versus no's and abstentions, right? So if you got 26 eligible members, what do you need to pass a vote?
14.
14. Okay. You need 14 to pass a vote. Now, issue number 2 comes up, and you have 2 members now who discuss, and then they are ineligible to vote. They're not abstaining. They are now ineligible to vote on that second matter. For the purpose of the night's meeting, altogether, the quorum at 26 is maintained. Because on the next issue, maybe nobody recuses, right? So it's just on that one issue where the number of eligible votes goes down. So now we only have 24 eligible votes, which means we need how many yes votes to pass? 13. Okay, we need 13 yes votes to pass. It's important to understand then that, and this is probably clear for you all, some community boards it seems to be a bit contentious that an abstention only happens when a person is already eligible to vote. A person who recuses because of conflicts of interest is just taken out of the thing altogether, right? And then you've got no's and abstentions which combine, and those have to be less than the yeses in order to pass the issue. Okay. That's voting in a nutshell. Let me just talk about a few things that are similar for you all as they are to many other public servants throughout the city. One of them is resources. Community board resources, of course, are supposed to be used for community board purposes. That means they're not supposed to be used for private practice, they're not supposed to be used for political campaigns, they're not supposed to be used for outside businesses. That includes the personnel and everything else. I don't imagine that this is much of an issue for you all. With public servants, it has tended to be an issue. You would be surprised at the incredible sense of entitlement some public servants have had over the years. Where there really is, while I won't say no one is really concerned, but there isn't really, you don't say, community board, Smith, how dare you make a personal telephone call on the community board telephone after the meeting or before the meeting. More and more an obsolete question because everybody has cell phones. But nobody's worried about personal telephone calls or like a fax that goes to the doctor's office or yada, 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 yada. Those in the city's mind are what's called acceptable incidental personal use. However, any kind of devotion of community board resources to a business, an outside practice, or a political campaign, even a de minimis legal term amount, would be enough to open up an enforcement case. And that's because the taxpayers' dollars should not be going to supplement people's private businesses. Politics. First, for community board members, can you run for office and still maintain your community board seat? Absolutely. You got to give it up if you get elected, but while you're running, that's not a problem. Once you get elected, you got this 2 hats rule, and you're going to have to give up your community board seat. Now, you all, just like everybody else, are subject to a fairly strict prohibition on any kind of supervisor asking any kind of subordinate to do anything in terms of a political campaign, whether one's own or someone else's. And this is the Anthony Serra thing we were talking about at the beginning. What does that mean for you all? That means that, I mean, your district manager, who you have the hiring and firing power over, and all the people beneath the district manager are considered your subordinates. And therefore you can't even request in a friendly way one of those people to volunteer or work for a campaign. And I think the reason why is because the phrase, "how would you like," when it comes out of your boss's mouth, does not always feel like a neutral phrase. You know, I'm sure you all in your day-to-day employment have had bosses come to you before and say, "Hey, how'd you like to have that report to me by Friday?" Yeah, you're laughing because it's probably happened to you, right? And then, you know, you want to send them an email back that says, "You know, I was thinking about your request, you know, you were asking how would I like that, and I decided I wouldn't like that. You know, I'd like you to do it, you know? But, you know, how would you like out of your boss's mouth?" It's sort of a very polite way of saying, "Do this for me when I want it." And when you start requesting subordinates about how would they like to volunteer for a campaign, and that also has been a problem in the past, you know, not to get into the history of Tammany Hall or whatever, but political machines are certainly a part of the history of New York. And this law is in some ways put in place to combat that. Now, free speech rights. So district manager wants to volunteer for, let's say Christine Quinn is going to run for city council, or run for mayor. Idiot,
Get
right.
the rumor correct.
Yeah, right, sorry, thank you. Get the rumor correct. Quinn is going to run for mayor, let's say. You all, of course, are free to volunteer for anybody who's running for mayor. That could be Quinn, that could be Quinn's adversary. And the district manager and any staffer at community board 2 can volunteer for exactly the same campaign. There's no restriction on that. So don't feel like you have to walk on eggshells if you show up at campaign headquarters on Saturday morning and somebody from your community board's there too. You just can't ask them to be there. But everybody's got the same free speech rights. You can volunteer for whomever you want. You can contribute to any campaign that you want. That is not in any ways impeded by this no superiors asking. The other side of this, in terms of superior subordinate, is no financial relationships between any superior or subordinate. Probably also not a thing that comes up very often, but when we say no financial relationship, we really mean that. Like, that means that anybody at the community board office, like, I can't rent any property to them or from them. I can't ask them to come work on my house, babysit my kids, can't ask them for a loan, can't, and here's a tough one, especially for attorneys, because, you know, you might have a hard luck case of some staff from the community board office who needs help with a trust or a will or some real estate closing. Legal services provided for free. That attorney-client relationship constitutes a business relationship, and that's also considered a financial relationship. So anybody in the, you know, when it comes like this in terms of the chain of command, there's no financial relationship allowed whatsoever. Representing clients before the board in terms of professional practices. Engineers, accountants, lobbyists, I guess, I don't know, lawyers, architects, thank you very much, absolutely. I cannot represent any client before the community board while I'm a community board member. You know, that feels a little weird. Like, you say, like, okay, we're not going to hear from you know, Columbia University, who's employing this architect here, and where's our, oh yes, it's a community board member here. He's going to take his hat off and then run over here and, you know, advocate for this side. The other thing that's not so obvious with that, though, is that let's say I have a small firm, and you know, a lot of architecture firms tend to be pretty small shops. You know, Bernard Schumi employs what, about, I don't know, 25, 30 people in the whole shop? Not very big, pretty well-known architect. Not only can you not represent anybody before your community board, but neither can your business partners. There is a way around this, and this is where those waivers come in. Let's say you got a law practice, got an architecture practice, you've got a client, they want to advocate, or they've got some issue before the community board, they want your business to represent them. You come to the board, our board, you get a waiver from us, which they may or may not grant. But if they do grant it, it's going to be on the condition that you absolutely recuse yourself from any of your client's business dealings with the community board. Under those circumstances, it might be possible, but you will have to check with us and get a waiver. The waiver is an official document that comes from us. It's not confidential. You can show it to the world. in fact, I think it's actually I think in most cases it's a published document when we grant a waiver. Okay, last thing maybe to talk about is this. Also, or maybe last two things to talk about. The first one is, let's say you have a business and you want to supply things to the board. There's an example, I think, in the handout about a stationery store. Let's say I own a stationery store and I want to sell things to the board. Not going to be able to do that. That is, I cannot conduct business directly with the community board. Let's say they have to print up a bunch of banners and a bunch of posters and a bunch of flyers. I can't, as a community board member, contract with my own community board to supply those services. Someone once asked me, well, what could I give those services as a donation? And that's an interesting question. I personally, in order to avoid any of the barbs or aspersions that may be cast upon me by my fellow community board members in such an instance, because you know how contentious these meetings can get, if you are interested in that, I would make a quick advice call to the board to see if there are any stipulations on that, so that it doesn't seem like you're getting some kind of massive free promotion from it. They might put conditions on how can you donate those services to the community board. But certainly you can't sell them to the board, because it just looks like somebody is dipping money out of their coffers and putting them into their own business, and the integrity of the choice sort of wilts. Post-employment, which is a weird thing to talk about. Employment. Nobody's even paid here, right? But not most people, right? Oh, nobody's paid here. So, nobody's even paid here. Post-community board... right, sorry. Okay. District manager, right.
He's getting rich off it, too.
Yeah, I'm sure, right. Just like us, right? We're about ready to retire in a couple more years. Post-community board service is what I should call it. Once your tenure at the community board is over, for 1 year, you cannot represent clients for pay back to the community board. It's kind of a 1-year revolving door policy, which basically, it's a standard thing. These kind of revolving door policies have been around in a lot of places since the 70s. It's like a cooling off period. And then the last thing to talk about is, how does a community board solicit for donations from businesses in the community? There is a little bit on this in that blue pamphlet there. The one thing I'll say is that where you want to tread lightly and where you want to call us is when one of those businesses has some kind of thing that's coming up for vote at the community board. Because now it starts to feel like maybe the community board's using a little leverage, like maybe we'll try to influence our vote this way if you split for the big block party we want to do, or whatever, or you give a big donation to buy new computers for the district office, or whatever. It's not a problem, of course, if the business has no matters pending before the community board, and if you think you're cutting it all close because something's coming up, or you got a class of businesses which might be involved. That's when you call us, and we'll give you clear guidance on what are the conditions where you are able to accept donations. Because in general, the city loves it when the private sector donates to the city. It's just that we want to make sure that that money is not tainted with any sort of adulterate blot, that might be a very Shakespearean term, right? Where people are saying like, oh, it seems like there's a quid pro quo involved. Gifts, I think, don't come up very often. Has anybody here ever been offered a gift as a community board member?
Hey.
Yeah, hey, great idea, right?
That's right.
We have food. We've had applicants come to the business committee and bring food and stuff.
Okay.
Oh, I'll open that back.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Make sure it's not poisoned. You might have to hire a taster. Okay, how does that work? Here's how it works. Did you say don't put the kibosh on that? You were telling her not to? Okay, here's how that works. Of course, we all as public servants, like Jonathan and I are full-time, district manager is as well, we're not allowed to take any valuable gift from anybody doing any business with any city agency. That's not true for you, all your part-timers. What it means is you're not supposed to take valuable gifts from people who have matters directly before your community board. I think you probably know that, right? Valuables defined by the rules of the board is something worth $50 or more, and I think that's in the pamphlet there. But basically, I wouldn't accept very much beyond a cup of coffee or a tchotchke, a pen or whatever. what about these things that come in, especially perishables, where you can't really send it back? You know, it's going to spoil by the time it gets there. And it's really not meant for you personally, it's meant for the board. I don't think it's a great practice to encourage that. I think once the stuff is already there, it's very much has to be accepted as a gift to the entire community board. Anybody who attends the meeting, from the members of the public to you all, gets a chance to partake in whatever this stuff is. That way we spread the guilt, right? Then they have to arrest everyone, then there's no community board, right? I mean, no, seriously, I think that alleviates any problem where a particular public servant is doing it. Although, I mean, you could still imagine on the advice side of things that where the board might say, you know, I don't know that it's a great practice to habitually accept that kind of food stuff. See you later, Bob. Thanks for having me out. I don't think it's a great practice to have you accepting this stuff all the time, but it's kind of a soft area, and use your best judgment there. You know, maybe where somebody's, you know, doing it all the time, and the stuff starts to get nicer and nicer, where you gotta say, hey, all right, enough. We just went through everything. Man, do people have any questions? Yes.
Yeah. On enforcement.
Yeah.
COIB makes a decision. Who is supposed to get the information about that decision?
Who is supposed to get the information about that decision?
When you make a decision on a situation on a board.
Okay, let me explain that. There are a couple of things. We have a very high confidentiality thing until we get to the end of any matter. Let me explain why for a second. There is always an opportunity for an ethics agency and any big bureaucracy to get turned into a witch hunt agency. One of the ways that happens more regularly is if you don't have real good confidentiality on the investigation side and on the advice side. What that means is that once we get an allegation of a violation and we open a case, we will not let anyone know, not anyone at that said public servant's agency. The only people who are going to know are the enforcement, not even me, like I'm not going to know about it. It's only going to be the enforcement attorney that's assigned, or the enforcement attorneys on the case, and the investigator assigned to investigate the case from the Department of Investigation. We won't comment on it to anyone, and I'll tell you why. Is because it's really unfair for a public servant who's got an allegation against him or her to have that allegation, which hasn't been proven yet, to be discussed sort of, you know, pell-mell. You know, you want to wait until there's actually been a determination, etc. Give them due process. Once that determination happens, all of our final judgments, if they do go to oath, if they don't, it means we've settled with said respondent and they've agreed that they had the violation. They need to satisfy 4 elements. They admit to certain facts that they violated. They pay a fine, usually, or at least they get a public warning. I think they get a fine of some kind, actually. They get a fine. I can't remember the 4th element. The 3rd element is that that disposition will be made public. What does that mean? That means it goes to the press. It goes to, who usually doesn't pick it up anyway, but in some kind of, you know, if a council member gets a case, maybe they pick it up. And it also goes to the general counsels of every agency and to the disciplinary advocates of every agency, and that's about it.
What about the Borough President's office?
The general counsel of the Borough President's office does get them. Jimmy Yan would be the guy who we send them to. And then I don't know if he disseminates them to other people or not.
The board involved? The board chair or the board membership that's involved in a conflict?
To the extent that yes, because the board chair, I guess, is considered like the head of the board, I think they're going to be copied on the disposition as well. I mean, I think Jimmy sends them out anyway, or if he's not, you could ask him to. But certainly it's public information, so anybody can get it who wants it. But we don't send it, I mean, it's not like we send it to every worker in the city or send it to everybody who lives in the city. Yes?
Does it resolve matters by stipulation as opposed to actually having a decision after hearing both sides? I think it's kind of a plea.
Yes, yeah, by the stipulation of certain facts.
And that's not reported, public reported, where it is.
They have to admit to certain facts in the disposition. You know, I'm not the expert on how the enforcement process works. Do you?
The what you combine two. The first one is statement of facts. Then there's the admission of guilt.
Yeah, okay. There's a statement of facts, and then there's the admission of guilt.
And those, how that's determined, how the disposition comes out, can be some negotiation in the settlement. But that's only if it settles. If it does go to the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, then it's not a settlement anymore, and depending on who wins of those two sides.
Yeah,
So
it's
settlements are not reported, but adversarial.
Once it's signed, the last one, the public, whatever was agreed upon in that settlement, whatever those facts and guilt were in that specific agreement, that's what's published.
Yeah, that is published. The settlement is published as well. That's one. Like if they won't publish, like then we go to oath. Like that's got to be one of the stipulations of the settlement agreement is that it will be a public disposition. And if it's not, if they don't agree to that, then we go to the administrative law judge. And if we win there, then that decision is going to be made public. And then that can be appealed right up to, you know, take Article 78. And then that goes right up to the state Supreme Court, which I think has happened. Liz Holtzman, I think that happened to when she had her conflicts of interest case. She appealed it straight on that.
That was our one.
Really? I thought Holtzman lived in Park Slope.
No, I didn't show you.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned if you worked for the city, for example, if I was a teacher.
Yes.
I have to recuse myself from any kind of thing that involved programs for children or...
No, that's an excellent question. You only have to recuse yourself if the programs for children involve the Department of Education. One could easily conceive of programs for children coming out of ACS, Administration for Children's Services, or the Department of Youth, Community and Development. They got nothing to do with the Department of Ed, and to that extent, you don't have to recuse yourself from anything.
But if it's with the Board of Ed program,
Yeah.
I have to recuse.
That is correct. You disclose, discuss, don't vote.
Yeah, I have one that came up on my committee a few years ago that the chair of the board said something that I'm not quite sure was correct, although the board member didn't wind up doing the correct thing. We have had a board member who rented an apartment in a building in our district,
Okay?
and he was at war with his landlord over tenant issues in that apartment. The landlord then comes in front of the zoning committee for a zoning variance on a part of the building that's totally unrelated to the residential section of the building. And the chair of the board said because the board member did not have a direct financial interest in the application in front of the board, he could vote. The board member decided, though, to avoid even the appearance that he would refrain from voting. What do you think about that? Was that the correct decision or not?
Yeah, it's funny, you know, on the advice side, you know, there's like classes of information. You talk about, and I'm not an advice attorney, but you talk about, okay, what's a violation? And then what's not a violation, but what does not get you a gold star from the Conflicts of Interest Board? You know, like accepting a $49 gift from a vendor is like a classic example, you know. Not an enforcement case, and not something we'd ever advise someone to do. And then, you know, you're also put into a class of like maybe best practice advice. And I think certainly it sounds to me, without knowing all of the details of the case in question, that the best practice, of course, is for the community board member to go ahead and say, like, you know, people are going to be asking questions about this. They're not going to believe that my vote was coming from the public service side. They're going to think that it was because I've got this suit against this guy in this only tangentially related process. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of raise the bar, so to speak, for myself. It sounds to me like the chair is probably right. Like I don't know if he necessarily had a violation because it's an indirect connection at best. But I'm always loath to comment on actual cases because, you know, when the advice attorneys do it, you know, they take the call, they get all the details, and then they go looking for fact patterns. So it's a little unfair of me to try to throw any kind of determination out here in this sort of situation. You know. Any other questions? Yes, the district manager, and I'll go around. Yes.
I have a few questions, but I'm going to take one chance. So we have a holiday party every year.
Okay.
We send out invitations to everyone on our email list, which is several hundred people. It's probably, mailing the email, probably close to 800 people.
Okay.
most members of the public, and even those who don't come, we get, only people who do come usually are folks who do have this for the board.
Okay.
Is that any sort of conflict?
Okay, so I'm going to throw holiday party. Some of these people are going to either have or are going to have.
The net portion goes to the board. The net portion.
So it's kind of it's like a fundraising thing almost, right? Like we're not, they're just not paying for costs of the party.
Well, actually, the amount of money we make in the party is almost the same as that we spend on it. But,
yeah, right.
But we do sell tickets and.
There's only a slight profit made, but there's no profit.
You know, I'm going to hew a little conservatively and say that I'm not sure that I like the smell of that. And I'll tell you why is because it feels a little bit like those bodies who do choose to participate in the party are somehow getting in a little closer to the community board, especially for the fact that they're subsidizing this holiday party that you throw. However, having said that, before you run out and change it, that is a perfect thing to call us tomorrow on advice. So you can figure out how to plan your party this year, still have one, have a good one, but just do it so you're not worried about any of those issues.
I just want to say, the amount of money that they kick into the party, it's not like they're subsidizing it. Maybe this is enough, a few $100 out of a $3,000 party or something like that. But it's not like they're kicking in most of the money.
Well, can I ask a question? I'm not privy to the holiday parties, but there used to be a tier system where it was a minimum of, let's say, $40 for food, but if you wanted to give $100 toward the community board special fund, you could do that. I don't know if people with business did give the extra money.
A different category, sponsor, benefactor, friend.
You know,
There's board members who usually pay a little bit extra.
Sure.
But it covers people who perhaps couldn't afford to come to the party.
Right.
It just gives us a little tiny bit of latitude. We're not talking about hugely expensive meals.
Yeah, these are, of course.
It's also very minimal. The real money that we put into our fund comes from stuff like our street fair and such, so the party generates very little money.
No, I understand that. The reason why I'm playing a little conservatively and asking you maybe to make a quick advice call is because it's never been a problem, like you've always done it this way, and then all of a sudden somebody doesn't get what they want. And it turns out that they also weren't invited to the holiday party, right? And now all of a sudden you've got a problem on your hands because somebody is alleging a kind of institutionalized favoritism or old boy system. So the advantage of making the call to us, even if they say, hey, that's a great way to do it, is then you've gotten the conflicts of interest board to give you the go-ahead. So when the paper comes to calling, if they've got a problem with your action, it's actually with us, not with you, because we said it was okay. So that's another reason why I say to call. It's not because it might change the party, but to give you a little more peace of mind. I don't know if it's going to change the structure of the party or not, but if it does, I don't think it's going to change it much. But I would say...
They're not huge parties, they're small parties, and
yeah.
in a restaurant.
I just would... I would just want to get that. I mean, those are all facts in the advice call to give to the attorney, and they'll talk about it, and that's probably something for the general counsel to ponder for a little while to figure out how that fits in. Might be a conversation with Jimmy Yan we have there. Just figure out if that's the best practice. Maybe it is, but I think that should be considered by someone. That should be vetted by us, basically. We have another question in the back. No?
Yes, I had a question. I'm not sure. Public members, how are public members fit into the public members in the committees?
Excellent question. And there was just an advisory opinion not so long ago about this. Public members of community boards. I'm going to read it to you because it's summarized right here. Let's see. The public member. Okay. Public members, this came out in 2004. Public members of community board committee are not public servants within the meaning of the city's conflicts of interest law and are therefore not subject to the provisions of that law. Pretty simple, I guess.
But thank you for coming.
Yeah, right. Thanks for coming. Question here, yes?
NYU happens to be the owner of the real estate where our community board office is located.
Okay.
NYU comes before us all the time.
Yep.
With many items. One of the things, as a landlord, they have agreed to make certain improvements in the office, which they...
Are they following through on them? Yes?
Well, they said they were going to. Now, is that a conflict? They're giving us, they're improving the real estate that they own. At the same time, they're going to come before us for different applications. So where do you draw the line?
You know, that's an excellent question. It would seem to me that, like...
Can I throw something in here, because I'm also a tenant of buildings where this is, and I think it's a while since we've had the apartment, the offices painted.
Yeah, and that's routine maintenance, I think, right?
Yeah, it's not as if they're doing something.
They're not going to rebuild the office. They're going to...
They don't have an obligation in a commercial setting to do that. Maybe in a residential setting.
We have a commercial piece.
Things to the city.
It sounds, without knowing more of the details, it sounds to me like if they're doing a kind of, if they're doing upkeep on the place, because this thing is kind of leased to the board, or not even leased, right? It's donated. Oh, it's leased. It's leased to the board, and this is kind of standard upkeep.
I'm talking paint and carpet.
That sounds to me like a kind of thing they might do in a lot of other offices as well.
But if they were, if they're not required, let's say, to put down carpeting in any of their tenants. Why would
Yeah,
they?
but this was part of the lease
Why would they?
negotiations that went on with
It
them.
has nothing to do. I'm asking the question. If they're putting down carpeting and they're not doing that for any of their other tenants,
Oh, right. So
why are we special?
Okay. Well,
Are we getting special treatment?
No, it's just part of the lease.
if it is part of the lease agreement, then I think somebody just bargained well, and that's like, so you signed a contract and they've got to put carpeting down.
No, but was the arm bent in any way? I mean, can it be considered?
I absolutely do not know the answer to that question, and I tell you why, because I just don't know enough about the contract and.
I might care to point out, as a community board member, NYU doesn't buy any favors from the community.
Talking adversarial. Yeah, right.
And the moment they're doing a lot of renovations right throughout the buildings, and they're redoing bathrooms, which haven't been done for like 50 years or more.
Yeah.
And so, we call it routine renovation, routine maintenance is pretty accurate.
Well, okay, so again, best thing to do, because the question comes up.
If we just call you and talk,
Yeah.
how about we resolve it that way?
Yeah, that's actually to wrap this thing, to wrap that issue up before I get to your question, because I want to do that too, is that those kinds of issues, because they are presenting questions which seem like, oh, we're kind of positing facts this way or that way, and people are wondering about the appearances of that, call Jimmy or call us, we'll work it out, we'll give you the absolute bottom line on it, and that way you don't have to worry about it. And probably it's going to be a short conversation, unless it's a very complicated matter that the board needs to ponder because they've never looked at it before. So it could be handled over the phone. Yes?
Board members who hold salary positions or get stipends from not-for-profit, do they have to recuse themselves from applications before the board in which their organization takes a position?
Yeah, because if I'm salaried, I'm deemed to be associated with that not-for-profit.
1099 or a stipend, or 1099 too? On a regular basis, 1099.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're asking. Yeah, I think so, because even a 1099 can have a regular or a semi-regular appointment. We're not talking about like an honorarium that happens like once in a blue moon. We're talking about something that's more regular, and I think that's a financial interest. That's an association. It's a good question.
I think we could follow up on that. The same thing, the advocating a position, even if your particular nonprofit is advocating a regular position, like you mentioned before, maybe you could explain that a little bit more. For example, a housing organization that's fighting for tenants' rights, which you have to be employed by if you're looking for to get support from the food board, something like that.
I think we're
But
talking
it's not
about a two-hat
necessarily a
situation.
benefit.
Member of board, member of
Because
organization.
we have a lot of members
Okay.
that are, in positions of all kinds of nonprofits. And I was just curious if there's a little bit more information about
Well, as I understand it, it's not the advocacy issue that one is worried about. I'll tell you what you're right about. As a community board member, let's say you're on the board of a not-for-profit, they're saying, we need more clinics. I don't know, we need more HIV clinics, we need more methadone clinics. Like, this is what we need. And there's 50 other not-for-profits that are saying, we need more methadone clinics. That's an advocacy issue. Now, what is clear, I think, is that when your not-for-profit comes to advocate, not because like they've got some, rezoning issue, or they've got some issue that's going to affect their financial interest. They got some grant proposal, somehow you're involved. We're just talking about, it's their advocacy issue, their time to speak about how you need to give more money to the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene for more methadone clinics. If that's who runs those, I don't even know. But what's clear is that, as you have said, there shouldn't be a two-hats issue where you go, okay, you know what, everybody, I'll see you later. I'm walking over to my friends in the not-for-profit, and now I'm going to advocate over here and put that hat on. However, does one have to disclose, discuss, and refrain from voting is a different question. And I'm pretty sure that you don't have to do that, because whether or not you vote yay or nay is not going to affect the financial interest of the not-for-profit.
Directly.
Yes.
Directly. Maybe not even indirectly. We don't know.
What about the not-for-profit solicits donations from applicants before the board?
You're asking.
In return for approvals, in return for
membership.
or forced membership.
In their organization.
Okay, not-for-profit solicits donate. Well, if I'm selling votes, I'm selling votes, right? That's just, that's a corruption issue.
For them or for a third party outside the organization?
I think if I'm offering my vote in exchange for, like, if I say, I'll vote your way if you give $1 million to the Breast Cancer Foundation, that's still a violation. That's still a corruption issue.
Yeah, but how are you going to prove that on a third-party transaction that actually happened?
From the applicant.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's up to the investigator.
I'm not saying those are easy cases to prove. That's what trials are about. But if your other question, I guess, is like, well, no, that's it. We've gone a long time. I'll just change another tape. Let me just clarify the not-for-profit issue real quickly. Community board member serves on the board of directors of not-for-profit organizations not entitled to vote on board resolutions recommending funding by city agencies for that organization, or other resolutions that could result in a direct economic gain for the not-for-profit in question. So, if the voting issue comes up where the not-for-profit has a methadone program, they want to get money from Department of Mental Health and Hygiene to do it, and that's what you're voting on, that's where you disclose, discuss, don't vote. But if it's a kind of general interest where you're going to vote and it's support for the kind of work the not-for-profit does, that's not direct economic gain, it's not about funding, you don't have to disclose, discuss, or refrain from voting. Wait, soliciting donation in return for approval is just a corruption issue.
Okay.
Right, that's just official misconduct. Yeah, it's a criminal thing. Going around the law school debate's happening here, right? Yeah.
I have a second part of that first question. If you are an artist and we are approving, like we've done in the past, an artwork on a wall.
Okay.
That's stretching it, but you actually are a person who makes a living by doing art.
Yeah.
Do you recuse yourself from that vote because we're voting on a mural or something?
Only if you were
How far do you take this?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I think it's really simple if we keep in mind the direct financial benefit. So if the artist is my son, or my debtor, or my creditor, my friend's not my associate. Friend is not under the law, right? Your friend's got the mural up, you got no, if you don't owe that friend money, or artists, they probably owe you money, actually. Then you're fine. You don't have to disclose, discuss, or refrain from voting, because there's no benefit that...
How long that thread goes.
No, that's a good question. Good question. Really, the only silly question that we face is the one you don't ask that becomes a problem for you later on. So call us up. use us as a resource whenever you need some clarity on these issues. You're doing really interesting, important work, and we just want to help you do it without running into stupid scandals, you know? Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
And the